Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in Matthew chapter 26. Just a kind of a warning if because thunderstorms are kind of moving across our area. So if I lose um, internet, that's why. So anyway, so we're in Matthew chapter 26. The very night that Jesus is betrayed, and then as we will see here, he is going to be arrested, and then he will go through a series of hearings, three. So the first hearing, Matthew does not record, is with Annas, who was the father-in-law to Caiaphas, and then Jesus will appear before Caiaphas, who is the high priest. And these are some evil people. They are the epitome of evil religion, hypocritical religion. And one of the things about this, because we can relate this to our everyday lives. I'll point it out as we move on, show you just how hypocritical these. It's unbelievable how hypocritical these guys are. Yet they were the pillars. They were the pillars of religion. They represented God, and it's just unbelievable. So, um, let's pull up the scriptures here and move on. And again, I'll do this kind of service announcement. Some of this could be hard to read because one, it is incredibly unjust. In other words, what we're going to see here is incredible. It's just incredibly unjust. And so we're just coming out of the garden where Jesus is praying. He takes Peter, James, and John with him, and he tells them to stay awake with him. Stay awake. Pray with me. They fell asleep. I mean, they were in a deep, hard sleep. And so finally, after the third, he would go and pray, then we'd come back, and he did this 3 times. And then let's see, I'll pick it up at verse 45. Then he came to his disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the time is near. The Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let's go. See, my betrayer is near." Now you remember in earlier in the setting, and let me just say this too, this is not a blow by blow. But when we get to Luke, we'll see that there's going to be a lot of more details added. A lot of more details added. Oh, okay. And there's and Luke's gospel will be, I would say, the most orderly. In other words, how things happen in the order in which they take place. Matthew and the other ones basically are just telling the story, and they're just telling the story, and they're giving certain details, okay, but not, like, let's say, in the order in which they're given. So, for example, you see here, Matthew doesn't focus on when Jesus leaves. John does. John is going to, at some point, turn to Judas and say, "Go do what you have to do." Judas knew what he was talking about. The other disciples did. And they kind of thought when he left, doing the supper, when he left, he was going to give to the poor. I don't know why they would think that, but that's what they thought. And then, so Judas is not present in the garden. So as Jesus goes to the garden and now he's praying, Judas is not there. He goes to the priest gets the troops of people, and so now he's on it. Jesus just announced, hey, he's coming here. He's near. Large mob with swords and clubs was with. In our day, we would say that the police showed up with guns, right? Rifles, the guns and stun grenades and all, the whole riot, right? And riot gear stuff. And so watch what Jesus says. Um, Verse 48. So his betrayer, uh, hmm, okay, his betrayer um, is, see, I'm almost, think I'm losing one of my, uh, it's here. Okay. All right. Anyway. Okay. All right. Like I say, I might lose my feed because of the weather. But anyway, so verse 48 says, his betrayer had given them a sign. The one I kissed, he is the one. Arrest him. Now this kiss was a friendship kiss. So again, it is adding, what they call salt to the injury. It's just worse because not only is he betraying him, but then he is betraying him with a sign of friendship. So verse 48, so he went right up to Jesus and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Now that phrase there is interesting to me when he says, "Greetings, Rabbi." That's just interesting to me. Greetings, Rabbi. Okay. Because he was more than rabbi. Judas knew him more than just a rabbi. So I think it also kind of now, at this moment, you see the mentality of Judas. So verse 50, friend, Jesus asked him, why have you come? Remember, the kiss was a friendship kiss. So friend, why have you come? Then they came up, took hold of Jesus and arrested him. And at that moment, one of those with Jesus reached out his hand and drew a sword and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his ear. Now we know this is going to be Peter in the other Gospels, and the sword here was more like a dagger. Wasn't something that one of the big sword, but just like a little dagger. But he notice he cut off his right ear. Excuse me. Then Jesus told him, "Put your sword back in its place, because all who take up the sword will perish by the sword." Now, actually, in this process, Jesus actually heals the servant. He heals his ear, and that's important. As I said, Matthew is not focusing on that, but he actually heals the servant. And the reason why I'm bringing this up here is because if you think about all what's going on, how they approach Jesus as if he was a criminal. Okay, so he sort of rebukes Peter and says, "Oh, do you not think I cannot call on my Father, and he will provide me at once with more than 12 legions of angels?" Now, a legion of angels was believed to be somewhere around 6,000 troops. And Jesus said, I could at once call 12 legions. Not that it would take that much. In the Old Testament, you remember the story where one angel killed 185,000 Syrian soldiers. So he says, but he says, and again, this is not meant to be kind of exact. It was just meant to really show, I really don't need your help. The one thing is, I don't need your help. But look at verse 54. It says, how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that says it must happen this way? Now, I want to take another thing, just on a sidebar note. One of the things when I see Christian literature, sometimes it could be movies. You have Christian movies that they try to be sort of, you know, kind of modern. And so it'd be a modern twist on something. So let's say someone goes back in time. And the one of the things that they want to do is to let's go back in time and stop the crucifixion of Jesus, stop the trial. All of the rapture movies, the same thing. They want to foil the plan of the Antichrist. So your Left Behind movies and the old school Thief in the Night, and they have the Tribulation Force, the Tribulation Army, and really, you would be stopping prophecy if you do that. That's why those movies are so silly. That thought line is silly. That if I could go back and just stop Jesus from dying, you would be you would be attempting to stop prophecy. And then notice, so there's a rebuke here of Peter is that if you continue with this, you're trying to, not that you would, but you are attempting to stop God's foreordained plan. So in other words, his first rebuke, remember when Jesus told him he was going to be crucified, and Peter go, it will never happen to you. And Jesus rebuked him and said, get thee behind me, Satan. You don't care about the things of God, but the things of men. So we don't, sometimes you can be overcome with the emotion, the sentiment, and don't realize that you are also, coming against the plan of God. Verse 55. So let me go back. So notice he says, how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that it must happen this way? You're attempting, he said, in other words, you're attempting to foil scripture. Okay. So at that time, Jesus said to the crowds, have you come out with swords and clubs as if I was a criminal to capture me? One, Jesus would have went willingly. In other words, you didn't need the show of force. He says, every day I used to sit teaching in the temple complex, and you didn't arrest me. But all this has happened so that the prophetic scriptures would be fulfilled. And I'm going to be ad-lib here, turning to Peter, which you're trying to stop. Okay, he didn't say that obviously, but anyway, then all of the disciples deserted him and ran away. Now remember, Jesus told them, all of y'all are going to forsake me. So they ran away. Now remember, they're in the garden. They're in the garden, and so they flee. They forsook Jesus in the garden. Verse 57. Those who had arrested Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had convened. Excuse me. So again, he's actually had two. He actually had again two hearings under the Jewish council. One before Caiaphas' father-in-law, Annas, and then Caiaphas. I don't know why Matthew did not mention that hearing. But that was actually the first one. So again, we've actually now skipped ahead in time. It says, meanwhile, Peter was following him at a distance, right to the high priest's courtyard. Now, if you look at the temple again, you'll see you had the temple, and then outside where people would kind of congregate in the courtyard. And so Peter, and actually we find out too with other scriptures that John kind of had some connections with some of the people in the temple. James and John, remember, you had 6 of Jesus' apostles that were very devout Jews. And so John knew one of them, and they let John in, and then John was able to get Peter to hook up, and he came in, and he was, again, in the courtyard. He says, meanwhile, Peter was following at a distance, right to the high priest's courtyard. He went in and was sitting in the temple, sitting with the temple police to see the outcome. Then the chief priest and the whole Sanhedrin, and this is the Jewish body of elders, were looking for false witness testimonies against Jesus so they could put him to death. But they could not find any even though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, two who came forward stated, "This man said, I can demolish God's sanctuary and rebuild it in 3 days." Now, again, you see this in John's telling, in John's gospel. He says, then the high priest stood up and said, do you not have any answer to what these men are testifying against you? One of the most frustrating things for people, especially crooked, is Jesus didn't say anything. In fact, Jesus could have probably cleared himself with one statement. Right? Just prove it, right? They have no proof. But it's interesting that all of these false witnesses, that every time they would bring a false witnesses, the testimony would fall apart. Now remember, these were the most holy of men. The holy of men. Men are supposed to stand for truth. So the high priest stood up and said to him, don't you have any answer to what these men are testifying against you? But Jesus kept silent. Then the high priest said to him, by the living God, I place you under oath. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. You have said it, Jesus told him. But I tell you, in the future, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his robes, and said, he is blaspheming. Why do we still need witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What is your decision? They answered, he deserves death. Now, if you go back and you hear them say, he blasphemed, the question would be, how? In other words, he said, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power, coming in the clouds of glory. How is that blasphemy if he has demonstrated, which they know he did, they demonstrated that he is the Messiah, that he is the Son of God. So what's the blasphemy? Now, at this point, it doesn't matter because they're desperate. They just were looking for stuff. Remember, they had witnesses after witnesses after witnesses that all of their testimonies fell apart. Now, if they were really, really true, they really wanted the truth, they would have ended this just based upon the false witnesses, which tells you that they had no intentions of being truthful. And again, these are the these are the holiest men, which kind of lets us know that religion is corrupt. And we can pretty much every single denomination, you see this kind of action, every single one of them. You see corruption, you see corrupt religious leaders. Verse 66 again. What is your decision? They answered, he deserves death. Then they spit in his face and beat him. Others slapped him and said, prophesy to us, Messiah. Who hit you? Now they was mocking him. Now let me also say this, that this is a kind of a textbook definition of suffering. Now the word suffer means to allow. That's what the word suffer means. So now we think of, okay, what it is that we are allowing. And we often get that also mixed up with hardships, going through hardships. And sometimes we go through hardships that are beyond our control. But in a biblical context, suffering is you are allowing it. Here, Jesus could have stopped this, and yet he allows this, right? So he allows that they were abusing him. And it seemed like that they were abusing him right in front of the high priest. So again, you see their hypocrisy. Now he says, now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant approached him and said, you were with Jesus the Galilean too. But he denied in front of everyone, I don't know who you I don't know what you're talking about. And when he had gone out to the gateway, another woman saw him and told those who were there, this man was with the Nazarene. And again, he denied it with an oath. I don't know the man, right? And after a little while, those standing there approached and said to Peter, you are certainly one of them, since your accent gives you away. You speak like a Galilean. Y'all talk alike. And then he started to curse and to swear with an oath, I do not know the man. And immediately the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the words Jesus had spoken, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. Now, when we get to Luke's gospel, what makes this scene even more intense, because what has happened is that after you see that they were through, they set Jesus out and kind of waiting for the morning to come so they can bring him before Pilate. So Jesus, after being again abused by the temple police, he was brought out and he was sitting in the courtyard. Now remember, Peter was sitting in that courtyard. And when Peter denied him, Jesus turned and looked at Peter. How awful is that, right? How I mean, just think about that. Jesus turns to Peter as he's denying him. Okay? And history tells us, this is history, not scripture, that plagued Peter for the rest of his life. Even, and this is what they call the history, the tradition, that when it came time for Peter to meet his death, a martyr's death, that he refused, he begged not to be crucified right side up like his Lord, but that he was crucified upside down. Okay. Again, we don't have any biblical evidence of that. You have a lot of stories that were passed down, but very interesting. You certainly can see why. In other words, the guilt he was over. Even though we'll see later on that Jesus actually forgave him, but he was always plagued by that guilt of denying the Lord. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.